one, I just had deep conviction in the idea that I was pursuing. Two, I really believe there's a huge power in inexperience. Like, you just don't know what's impossible, and therefore think, of course, this can be done. And I think there was quite a bit of that. But I also, my summer job and really what turned into a year-round job when I was at Princeton was working at a nonprofit organization that was student-run. And we had to support the organization through corporate donations. And I think I learned that there was philanthropic money to be had, and that if you asked for it and you made your way high enough generally in the corporate chain, you could actually, get significant funding, even for things as mundane as conferences and magazines, let alone a big idea like this. So I think it was having seen some of that helped me also know what was possible. I was so driven, I was over-involved, and I think it was my engagement in various extracurricular activities that had a huge formative effect. Part of the debate team and, editor of the school paper, and then when I got to college, became just so involved in various journalistic and endeavors and in ultimately running this organization that, even when I was a senior in college, had a budget of more than $1.5 million, So I think a lot of that, I think the colleagues I met along the way were, certainly instrumental. There was actually a moment, and this is such a sort of one of those classic, probably took 10 minutes of my life, but I think it may have had a very seminal effect. I was actually pursuing this summer job. It was the summer after my freshman year. And, I was supposed to go, I was stationed in the Midwest, and I was supposed to go to these various corporate executives and ask them to buy advertisements in this magazine as part of the student-run publication. So we were meeting with a man who ran a big investment bank in St. Louis. And we asked him if he would support this magazine. And he swiveled around in his chair and pointed out his window and basically said, "Why would I do that?" And he pointed down and said, "Let me tell you what's happening down there, 2 blocks from the building, where I'm working." And he was talking about all the challenges facing the kids in St. Louis who are growing up, in poverty, experiencing violence every day. And he was saying, why would I ever support this when there are such more pressing needs? This sent me into a total crisis. I didn't want to continue with the summer job because I was just thinking, well, why am I doing this when there are greater needs in the world? And I resolved at that point, because I had to make the choice, do I keep doing the summer job or not? I finally decided I feel responsible to finish the summer job, but I'm just going to figure out how to do this and then figure out how to actually address the pressing needs that exist. I think having an education and having a degree from Princeton and having access to the Princeton network I think it's empowering. I mean, it has its downsides when you do this kind of work, but overall, it was very empowering. I think the fact that I was saying I'm graduating from Princeton and I just proposed this in my undergraduate thesis got me meetings that I never would have gotten otherwise from people who had some connection to Princeton or went to Princeton or whatever. And that was probably the biggest asset I had coming out of Princeton. I had just, as I said before, been just overly obsessively involved and busy throughout my time in college. And for some reason, really had not registered on the idea that I got to figure out both. I got to write a thesis, and I've got to figure out my summer job. I mean, it just struck me in about October or November of my senior year. And I started just searching for what I really wanted to do, and I didn't want to do anything. I was just in a funk. I was, it was late 80s, and all of the recruiters really were investment banks, management consulting firms, brand management firms, all these companies for liberal arts graduates like myself that wanted us to commit 2 years to go work in those firms. I majored in public policy, the Woodrow Wilson School. And I didn't want to go work in one of those firms. And so I started trying to figure out what else I would do, but there was no clear path. I mean, I was doing things like writing to people saying, would you ever hire interns? Would you, looking for kind of off the beaten path things, but nothing was striking me. And honestly, I just descended into a funk. I mean, I've never truly been in a funk. I didn't want to do anything. I didn't even try to come up with a thesis topic. I think I was officially the last senior that year to propose a thesis topic. But simultaneously, I was organizing this conference for this student organization, the Foundation for Student Communication, which bridges the gap between students and business leaders and kind of political leaders and such, in terms of like fostering a discussion. And we organized a conference this year about education, and what it would take to improve the American education system. And it was really at that conference that I thought of this idea, because everyone was talking about all of the challenges that exist in our particularly urban and rural public schools, and particularly about the need for excellent teachers in these schools. And here we had all of these carefully selected student leaders from all over the country who were all saying, we would teach. No one's recruiting us to teach. We were known as the me generation. Supposedly all we wanted to do was go work in those firms, go work on Wall Street and such, make a lot of money. And I knew from my own searching, but also from my friends and others, I just knew I was one of thousands of people who were really searching for something we weren't finding. So that led to this idea, why aren't we being recruited as aggressively to commit 2 years to teach in our urban and rural public schools as we were being recruited at the time to commit 2 years to work on Wall Street? And the minute I thought of it, I just became obsessed. I just knew this has to happen. I thought it would have such a huge power for kids growing up today, just to channel all this talent and energy and, that's good enough for the firms on Wall Street, but into our, highest need schools. And at the same time, I thought it would have this kind of larger power, that we would be influencing the priorities and the consciousness of all these future leaders. And I had this idea that was going to change the consciousness of the country, and generate a belief that we need to do something to, bridge the disparities that exist in our country. I had to write a thesis, so luckily this became my, the answer to my search for a thesis topic. And so as part of the thesis, I both looked at the policy context in which this would operate and delved into the various organizations out there that could be models for it, the Peace Corps, Vista. There was a federal teacher corps in the 60s, and then, developed a plan, an argument for the creation of a national teacher corps. I was just obsessed with this idea. So I needed someone to sign on the bottom line and say that he was going to be my thesis advisor. And because I was so late in declaring a thesis, I couldn't get anyone to commit. Finally, someone sends me over to the chair of the sociology department, total legend. His name is Marvin Bressler. And he said, no, you can't write a thesis that's proposing an advertising campaign for teachers. But if you want to propose mandatory national service, I'll be your advisor, because that's my passion. And I said, sure. He signs. I never saw him again, turned it in 4 months later, and he calls me, 3 days after I turned it in. I'm terrified at that point, but he loved it, it turned out. He thought it was, his only question was, how in the world do you think you're going to raise the money to make this happen? But he ended up being a big supporter. I just felt like the timing was absolutely perfect for this, and I just thought it had to happen. Like the mood on college campuses was really so conducive to this. I mean, I myself, and I ended up pursuing the idea of actually teaching in the New York City public schools, and that also contributed to my realizing this is actually, it could work. But I was still trying to figure out what did I want to do, and that was the one thing I could think of that was inspiring. And so I just knew, like, for this generation, this is what we want to do. Secondly, there were huge needs. I mean, which enabled the whole thing there've never been headlines like this since. It's just the level of teacher shortages in the big urban areas was overwhelming. I mean, they were starting New York, LA with 1,200 teacher vacancies, et cetera. And there were various business executives in corporate America who had made this big pledge to say, we're going to take on the American education system. We want to improve it. And so it just seemed like the perfect time. And it seemed like if we passed that window of opportunity, it might never happen. I had arrived at Princeton really without knowing about the disparities that exist in our country. I mean, I really had been so isolated from them. And of course, you can't begin to see the depths of educational inequity at Princeton, but you can actually see on any campus in America, and Princeton included, how differently prepared people are to do well. And, she had grown up and gone to public schools in the South Bronx and had made it to Princeton. I mean, this woman is exceptional. I mean, incredibly driven, incredibly motivated. She ended up excelling, but the initial years were a struggle. And I met through her many of the other first-generation college students at Princeton, and you just saw how much of a divide there was even among the student body. So that turned me on to the fact that there was a problem. I applied to one firm in every sector. I mean, this was the most half-hearted job search. It was like, I'll apply for that management consulting firm and this investment bank, and I applied for 5 jobs altogether. Because my heart wasn't in it. And, thankfully, I mean, I'm so glad I didn't get any of those big jobs, because that made this decision easier, Because I was tortured. Like, should I start this? I mean, it seemed like it was a very kind of risky and challenging endeavor. So it was a big, huge, I was very angst-ridden over that decision. But, it was made easier by not getting those job offers for sure. I was so excited, honestly, to live in New York. I'd always wanted to live in New York. So I literally moved in, roomed with a bunch of other women who I did not know. I mean, we were just running a brownstone. And I had this tiny little room and like 2 or 3 trash bags full of my clothes. But one of these executives who I'd met, after I turned in the thesis, I sent it out to randomly selected corporate executives who were quoted in magazine articles saying they wanted to improve education, and a few of them actually agreed to meet with me. One gave me a seed grant, and another said I could use their spare office in Manhattan. So I would go. It was a lonely existence. Like, I would just go every day into this office in Manhattan, and I would send out letters and try to get people to meet with me, just trying to build support for this idea. Part of it is just staying very grounded in the needs of the school districts in which we were placing. I mean, it may be that some people were saying, well, why would you do this when we could do something else? But that wasn't the response we were getting from school districts, which were saying, if you can actually convince the people who I still remember the day I met with the head of human resources at the Los Angeles Unified School District, who looked at the list of the 100 campuses I said we were going to recruit on in our first year and started laughing and literally said, I'll tell you what, you get 500 people to apply from these schools, I will hire all 500 of them. Like, people really couldn't, it's hard to believe this now because it's so different today, but people could not believe that, top students, the most highly sought after graduating seniors, would actually want to teach in our highest need communities. So because we were getting such a positive response from school districts who felt honestly that the schools of education at the time weren't meeting their needs, we just stayed very centered in that. I think one of the aspects of this journey and probably a similar work, to address big, pressing, complicated problems is there's never really a moment where you just know you've made it, or you feel like, you feel a sense of satisfaction because, yes, you've made a little progress, but it's just so clear what else has to be done. And I think that's very much characterized our journey. But one thing I guess I would point to is that in the first summer after I graduated, so I was living off of the seed grant. I was meeting anyone who would agree to meet with me among potential funders, school districts, educators, just trying to help people understand the idea and seeing if I could build support for it. And everywhere I went, people actually thought it was a great idea, but they didn't think the college students would do it. That was the skepticism. People really did not think that the me generation would actually be willing to do this. And that was the one place where I had reason for confidence. So my plan became to show them, to basically launch a grassroots recruitment campaign. So we had students on all these campuses, put flyers under doors, and within 4 months, 2,500 people had applied. And that led to newspaper articles and, media and such. And ultimately that ended up leading to funding and et cetera. So, I guess if you go back to 20 years ago, the folks who were the top graduates and the most highly sought after, who had the most other options, very, very few of them were thinking about teaching. And it has to do with the societal image of teaching, the kind of financial, implications of the choice and such as well. But I just knew that for this to work, for us to actually inspire a movement of the most promising future leaders to channel their energy towards tackling this problem, we were going to have to surround this with an aura of selectivity and status. So that led to this idea that we have to be highly selective. What I later learned, of course, is that this is such incredibly hard work. I mean, it is a very, very rare person who straight out of college is ready to not just survive in the classroom, but actually excel, like actually put their kids on a trajectory to greater opportunity, who will then take the lessons from success and not the lessons of failure, and will leave more committed and not more disillusioned. So it's, we became even more selective over time. We're probably more selective now than we've ever been, because every year we learn more about what it actually takes. At the core, we're looking for, leadership ability. I think we've seen that the most successful teachers in the communities in which we're working, and in fact the people who long-term will exert the greatest influence to affect the kind of systemic changes we think are necessary, have real leadership ability. So that means, first of all, demonstrated track record of persevering in the face of challenges. That's probably the biggest differentiator of our most successful teachers. The ability to influence and motivate others in a sophisticated way that appeals to their values. Strong problem-solving ability, many things, and then as well, just a deep commitment to this work. We need people who want to work relentlessly in pursuit of this particular mission, and who hold very high expectations for kids and families in urban and rural communities. I remember our first core of 500 folks at the end of our training institute out here in Los Angeles, and they were ready to go, like ready to change the world. And some of the most inspirational among them had given powerful and rousing speeches. I mean, and this is not a clueless group of people, and it's not a white privileged group of people. It's a very diverse group of people. And some of them grew up in the communities in which we were going to be placing, others, very big range of backgrounds. But I still remember, when they started teaching, they hit the wall very early on, as they just saw our country's greatest challenges playing out before their eyes. Kids who just face extreme challenges that many of us would find to be inconceivable, who were bringing them into classrooms and schools that really were never set up to meet their extra needs. And, survival became the mantra. Like, if we can stick it out in the classrooms with the kids, that's a victory. And I think what happened was a few of those people over time, through going through their own learning curves, figured out how not just to survive, but how to actually help put their kids on a different trajectory. And that began the real journey of Teach for America. And, at the heart of that journey has been really learning from the most successful among our teachers, and understanding from them, what it took to actually get their kids invested in working incredibly hard in pursuit of a great education, and what it would take to actually, instill in them the kind of self-advocacy skills as well as the academic skills necessary to actually have many greater options than they otherwise would. But it's been learning from them as teachers, and them as alumni, as they've gone out and started schools and become school system administrators and, left the field of education to do things that, strengthen the communities in which, they were working as teachers. It's been learning from them that's really fueled our efforts over time. It's given us such a sense of possibility that we can make a real difference in this, and such a core belief that people are everything. Leadership is everything. Wherever you see meaningful progress, always it's about leadership. And so, we're feeling greater responsibility than ever to basically get bigger and better, to cultivate the most, significant, diverse, and just deeply grounded and effective core of leaders we can. Tammi was one of those teachers in our first decade, so very early on in our trajectory. And, I had heard certain teachers among our core would become these kind of legends, be like, these folks are just incredible. And I spent some time, it actually probably wasn't until around our 10th year, I'm guessing, where I just decided I'm going to just go start spending a lot of time with these teachers who are known to have had just truly transformational impacts on their kids' lives. And so one place I went was out to Gaston, North Carolina. It's an extremely remote part of North Carolina, where Tammi Sutton was teaching in this tiny little school. And she had taken her kids from where they were coming into her room, which was in the bottom quartile of achievement, based on decent standardized tests that the state of North Carolina has, and she would have them by the time they're in 8th grade at the very top of the pack. It's very, very hard to do that. It is hard to move kids' writing skills at that point. And so I spent time with her and realized, what she was doing to actually just, not only build her kids' writing skills, but change her kids' trajectories in terms of their own sense of confidence and their own sense of agency and such. And she ended up staying in that community. She's still there. She started a school and now multiple schools in that community that are literally taking kids where I'm guessing the college graduation rate was, less than 5%. Among the kids. And she's created schools where they're sending all their kids to college. They're going to UNC Chapel Hill alongside my nephew. It's just incredible. So the Tammi Suttons of the world have shown me and really all of us, and I think our country, what's possible. I mean, today we have hundreds of whole schools, not just whole classrooms that we can point to that are truly putting kids whose socioeconomic background would predict one set of outcomes on a very meaningfully different trajectory. So that's really what's fueled our sense of urgency, because we know we can solve this problem now, and it's just a question of will we be able to essentially cultivate enough leadership to work at every level of the system and at every level of policy and from across sectors to actually speed up the pace of change, and do on a much bigger scale what Tammi has shown is possible in her schools. The thing that I think is so exciting to see now is that we can look at communities where we've been placing a steady stream of folks for 15, 20, 24 years, in some cases. And I remember where things were 20 years ago in those communities, and so we can see really significant progress. And it's for many reasons. I mean, far beyond Teach for America, but it's also true that if you took all the Teach for America people out of the picture, so not only the teachers in the classrooms, but the alumni, whether they stayed as teachers or they became school principals or they, did a number of things, you would take away so much of the energy and leadership in the system. So, we could tell the stories of anywhere from Washington, D.C. to Oakland, California to New Orleans to any number of places, and you would see significant systemic impact. I think about New Orleans because forever, it was one of our very first placement sites. We always viewed it as our very most challenging. We were routinely meeting 8th graders reading on the 2nd grade level. It seemed that nothing was going to change. And just even in the last 6 years, the graduation rate in New Orleans has gone from about 54% to 78%. They have a high school graduation rate that's slightly above the national average. And at the same time, they've increased the college readiness rate pretty significantly among the high school graduates. If you're a kid born in New Orleans today, you have a totally different set of options. Like, your parents can decide where you go to school, and you have multiple great options. When I look at that system, 40% of the school principals are Teach for America alums. They are running many of the kind of nonprofit support organizations outside the system. They are the state commissioner of education is a Teach for America alum, and the whole school district, almost is staffed by these folks. So it's you see the long-term impact, and you see evidence that this really is about, Teach for America, people look at Teach for America and they think of it as a 2-year commitment, and it's about the 2 years, and that's really not what Teach for America is about. It's about the 2 years, but it's also about every year thereafter, and ultimately cultivating a leadership force of folks who know what you know after you've taught successfully in a low-income community, because you can't do that and ever leave it, because you realize, wow, my kids have every bit as much potential as kids anywhere else. The question is simply, are we as a country, as a community, going to give them the kinds of opportunities and the extra supports they need to fulfill their true potential? And once you see that, you realize, I can't leave it. When I was graduating from college, Stand and Deliver was a big hit. And so it's such a marker for me, because I remember, it's not like we all watched Stand and Deliver and thought, oh, well, let's learn from Jaime Escalante and spread the practices throughout. Like, people just thought he was such an outlier. They didn't really believe that was replicable. And today, we live in a different world today where we really know that this can be done and we can replicate success. There are dozens of schools in Los Angeles that are, not just in one classroom, but whole school buildings that are putting kids on a totally different path. And we see that in communities across the country. And so now that we see that, this morning I was in a network of schools called Camino Nuevo, and they work with almost exclusively English language learners. I was in a school that's right down the block from, a failing high school, which doesn't graduate. It graduates between 50 and 60% of its kids. And this school is graduating 90 to 95% of its kids, and, giving them the option to go to college. And many, many of them are going to college and then coming back in their communities to strengthen those communities. So the Camino Nuevos of the world are showing us what's possible. My parents ran their own very small business. I had one brother, and actually I was born in Austin. We moved to San Antonio. We moved to Dallas, and there was a community in Dallas known as the Park Cities, which had a highly regarded school system. And my parents made a real effort to make sure that they bought a house initially on sort of the outskirts of that community so that we could go to that school. And I have often thought, and even then was very conscious of the fact, as I moved into college and such, that the fact that I had the chance to go to that very strong public school was just, hugely instrumental, for me in helping me feel like the whole world was open to me and giving me the kind of education that would enable me to ultimately do whatever I wanted to do. I was one of these kids who was just, I had some sort of internal drive that was just led me to pursue that. I'm not sure it was imposed from the outside. gosh, this is so not the thing to say, but, I wasn't an obsessive reader or anything. Like I was, probably turned on by other things. But when I think back, I don't know, gosh, I can't even think way back. I think about some books that, The Fountainhead, I think, pretty much saved me in the initial years of Teach for America. Literally, I loved that book. But, I'm not sure books were the seminal thing that guided my path. There were definitely teachers who made a huge impact. I think about a woman whose name was Mrs. Fish, who was my 7th grade English language arts teacher. And, what I remember about her was just how hard she pushed. I thought I was a perfectly strong student at this point, but she pushed everyone to their limits. And, that was very instrumental, for me. In fact, all the teachers I remember had that same thing. Like they just had such high expectations and wouldn't stop pushing. I think she just conveyed the idea that, good wasn't good enough. And, I think the skill development and kind of critical thinking skills that year developed were instrumental. But I also think, I don't know, there's something about, that year that probably instilled within me that ethic that you just have to keep pushing to get better and better, and that if you work hard enough, it will pay off. Mrs. Fish and another legendary teacher in my life who was our, journalism teacher. I mean, I wanted to be a journalist. I was the school newspaper editor. And actually, I think it was the journalism teacher more than anyone else who taught me to write. And I did leave high school feeling like, and really with writing skills, which, are too few and far between, I'm afraid among our student population at this point. We live in a world of just greater and greater inequities. It's one thing I've discovered over the last few years as I've channeled more and more of my energy towards Teach for All and towards supporting social entrepreneurs in countries around the world that are adapting this model to their context is that this problem that we're fighting here is completely pervasive all around the world. All around the world with very few exceptions, socioeconomic background predicts educational outcomes and it in turn predicts life outcomes. And that problem is getting worse, not better. And so, this is just, it's a very relevant problem. How are we going to break that? Like, how do we break the link? And I guess what I'm seeing is that, just as I've seen in the U.S., that it's actually possible to break the link and that education can be a huge key to breaking the link, we're seeing evidence that it's possible all around the world. We see evidence in classrooms. We see these alums of the Teach for All programs going off and starting incredible schools and pursuing, policy change and such. And I really believe we're really at the front end of an effort that will see and affect rising educational levels and decreasing educational disparities, which hopefully will create a counterforce against the kind of increasing divides that seem to be taking hold through our global economy. We try to convey this on campuses now across the world because, so many young people feel so pressured to make the decision that will take them on the path to, impact and greatness. And it doesn't always lead them to make the choice to go this route. And I guess the thing I'd want to convey is just that, I know so many people in my generation, some who made the choice to be, part of these programs and similar efforts, and others who made very different choices. And just the most fulfilled, centered, grounded, happy people I know are people who made the choice to be part of an effort to actually make the world a better place. When I think about the happiest people I know, never left the classroom, never left the communities in which they're working, and at some level they may not enjoy the riches that we associate with success, but on a much deeper level, they just lead incredibly rich and fulfilling lives. So I would say, to me, it's the path of least regrets, is to at least make a short-term commitment to say, let me, work to make a real difference in the world. And the worst that can happen is you decide to move into something else later, but you'll always take with you, what you've given and what you've gained through that experience. It is incredibly hard and it's incredibly intense. And I have no perspective, having never really done something else. But even my friends who will come, give it their all and work at Teach for America or Teach for All for a good time, and then they'll go back into their law or banking careers or whatever, will say they've never felt intensity like they felt at these organizations. And I don't know what it is. I think it's just the work means so much to people and the stakes are so significant for lots of human beings. And there's so much more to be done at all points. So it's very intense. But I would rather be part of something intense that's making a huge difference than not. So I think it's worth it. About 8 years ago, maybe, I started meeting social entrepreneurs from all over the world, incredibly inspiring, committed, compelling folks who would somehow make their way to my office or some other, cross paths, and, they were looking for help. They were just determined that they had to launch Teach for India or Enseña Chile or whatever the case may be. And so there was something in the water. This one particular year, I think, I was talking to about 13 people. And the first adaptation of the Teach for America model was Teach First in the UK. And the folks in the UK were hearing from these same people. So we decided to come together and think about how to actually support these folks well. And that led ultimately to the idea of Teach for All, which is a network of independent organizations, now 32 of them, but growing quickly, that are calling upon their country's most promising future leaders, getting them to commit 2 years to teach in their high-need communities, investing in their development, fostering their ongoing leadership development as part of a global network that's committed to accelerating the impact of all of them and fueling an ultimately global movement where all of these efforts are informing each other and moving more quickly as a result. It's inspiring to see that the same kind of hearts and minds and souls that are drawn to this effort here in the U.S. are drawn to it all over the world. The level of talent and energy that's just magnetized to these programs. The power of diverse cultures for inspiring different ways of thinking and innovation as part of a network where everyone shares the same values and the same vision. It's just, there's something very potentially powerful about it. For our effort to succeed, our meaning like the broader effort to ensure educational opportunity for all, just thinking about, my own country, we think a lot at Teach for America about the fact that, most effective social movements are led by the disenfranchised group. And as we've progressed through this, we've, become really clearer and clearer in our thought that ultimately the kids who are in our classrooms today, their parents need to be leading this movement and really advocating for the opportunities they deserve. And so I think, working to ensure that that the communities themselves are charting the course. So it's not something that we're doing to communities, but they're really driving what they want to see happen in their communities. I think we need to get to that point. Every successful, truly successful kind of life-changing teacher and school I've ever met in this works in such deep partnership with, the kids and the families. They view themselves as just complete allies, and they know that the name of the game is ensuring that they are really just deeply, deeply invested in getting a great education or getting a great education for their kids. It is so fascinating to really see, spend time in communities where we've been placing people for 20 years. I mean, I went on a kind of number of visits this past spring to rural communities, tiny towns in the Mississippi Delta and rural South Dakota and such, where we've been placing a steady stream of people for 10 to 20 to 23 years in some cases. And it's very interesting to reflect on what is different and what more remains to be done. And I think you see very clearly in those communities the power of external leadership and high expectations, just helping people understand what's possible. And you also see the limitations. I mean, no outside force is going to, we've got to change communities from within. And so thinking about what is our role in cultivating community leadership in order to actually drive and sustain the change that we want to see is that's probably what really needs to happen to get where we're trying to go. There have been many moments where it's felt like the whole thing was going to come crashing down, definitely. I mean, our first decade was extraordinarily challenging. I think there was a lot of positive energy around the initial idea, and that carried us through the first 2 or 3 years. We had, we built a lot of funding support. The timing really was so perfect, but then in year 4, we started, many things collided to make the path far more difficult. We started losing our funding sources and, $500,000 and $1 million chunks. My complete lack of management ability started conspiring because, sort of the internal organization was in a bit of chaos. And we started realizing that education is a very politicized sphere, and we started really encountering many challenges as we worked to gain the policy approvals we would need even to get our teachers in classrooms. So there were many challenges, and probably most central of all was just we were on such a steep learning curve around how do you actually do this well? How do you recruit and select and train and support teachers who do excel instead of just survive, and who do take the right lessons and not the lessons of disillusionment? So we had a lot on our plate, and it was not clear that we were going to make it at many points. And I think the funding community started kind of clarifying for themselves what their priorities were going to be, and that took them away from what we were focused on. So there were many things, but I guess what I learned through that too was perseverance. Like in the end, perseverance does pay off. Time and perseverance takes care of, and listening. I mean, we did listen. We were very open. We did not. It was clear I did not know what I was doing, and so we needed to learn a lot about how to do the program well, how to manage effectively, how to develop a diversified and sustainable funding base, how to navigate the political challenges more effectively. But we just embraced the learning curve, and I do look back and think that the fact that we had to do that the hard way, the lessons we learned through those initial years and through that era were, very hard won and are very deeply embedded in the kind of very core of the organization in a way. There are constantly new evaluations being done on Teach for America by these third-party organizations, and they're invaluable resources to us in terms of helping us understand where we're strong and where we're weaker. But this is the most recent study, and it's a gold standard study, and so it's very encouraging. I think you look at the results and realize there's still so much more to be done, because the fact is, none of our kids are not making enough progress, but it was very validating to see that that the Teach for America core members were doing well compared to the other comparison groups. We have never attempted to say that this is the one way all teachers should come into the profession. I mean, that's just really not what we do, and it's not what we believe. Like, we are channeling an additional stream of folks. I mean, we need every additional person who has the motivation and the ability to, meet the extra needs of kids in our lowest income communities. So we're one additional stream of those folks. Contrary to popular perception, we invest a tremendous amount in their training and in their ongoing professional development. And as the studies show, they do succeed with their kids. And at the same time, there really is this very crucial long-term impact. And I think it's just hard for people to get their head around the kind of big idea of Teach for America. But all you have to do is teach in today's classrooms to realize we're not going to solve this problem through classroom teaching alone. This is a much bigger problem. We need to change the way schools are run and set up. We need to change the way school systems are designed. we need to take some of the pressure off of schools. If we don't figure out how to improve economies, how to better support the families that are growing up in poverty through stronger social services, stronger public health, we're never going to get where we're trying to go. So that's really what Teach for America is working to do. On the one hand, to provide an additional stream of teachers alongside others, making no comment. I mean, we're here at the Loyola Marymount, School of Education, which is one of our greatest partners in the world, which we think does incredible work. So our effort isn't meant to be a competitive force to schools of ed. It's meant to be, a way to develop a generation of leaders who will work not only through an initial 2-year commitment, but through the rest of their lives to take on the root causes of a very systemic problem. The American dream just means, to me, it means the ability to do anything that you want to do. I was so conscious my senior year in college. I felt like the whole world was open to me, that I could do anything I wanted to do. And I actually thought about why that was. And I knew it was because I was very aware that not everyone in our country feels the same thing. And I knew it was because I had simply had the chance to attain a strong education. And I consciously thought about that and thought, you know what, this is what I want to do. I want to focus on ensuring that many more kids have the chance to attain an excellent education and also feel that the whole world is open to them and that they can pursue the American dream. I, first of all, met my husband through my work. And, I was working so obsessively, and still do really, that I'm not sure where I would be if I hadn't sort of lucked into meeting the perfect guy that way. We have 4 incredible kids. It's really important to me to have kids and have true balance of full professional life and also a full personal life. And I've put all of my energy into figuring out how to make that work rather than kind of angsting about whether it's possible. And so far, so good. We're not, our kids are not yet, in the clear, but they seem to be doing well so far. I give up certain things because my professional role is so intense. I travel constantly. And of course, that takes its toll on the kids and all, but I'm also able to bring them into my work, and I just think that's such an incredible asset. I've taken my oldest son now on some of my trips around the world, around the United States. What middle schooler gets to see rural China and, the launch of Teach for Japan and spend time in schools in the Mississippi Delta, realizing basically that, the commonality of humanity and the fact that we can actually make a difference against these extreme social issues. So I think, so far so good, but I feel like you can navigate the challenges and make the most of the opportunities and make it work.